Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's open lecture, the title of which is "What is the Purpose of Business? Cooperatives and mutual enterprises, key contributors to our nation's sustainable growth and prosperity." And very pleased tonight to welcome Rowan Dowland, who is the General Manager Development at bankmecu, Australia's first cooperatively owned bank. And those of you who've been to events organised by APSI over the last couple of years will know that I'm a big fan of bankmecu, which is partly why I'm the MC tonight. I will declare an interest. I am a customer. I think this bank is so cool, I follow them on Twitter, which is something I couldn't say about the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. So it is a bank with a difference. It's also the only Australian bank that is a member of the Global Alliance for Banking Values. I don't know whether you're going to talk about that tonight.
Touch on that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which you'll find on the hashtag @GABV, which is worth going and having a look at them and go and visit their website and see what kind of things that they do. So there's a group of these institutions around the world that are doing some fabulous work furthering sustainability. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. I'm leaving my script. As is custom, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and the land on which we are meeting tonight. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders, past and present, and extend that same respect to Indigenous Australians who are here today. And Griffith International have arrived. They're going to make some lame excuse about bad traffic and all that kind of stuff now. We've saved you the front row. Let me tell you a little bit about Rowan. His career extends across various senior management and executive roles in governments, community and corporate sectors. At bankmecu, he is responsible for shaping the bank's corporate strategy and response to sustainable development. Over the past decade, this small bank has developed a reputation for combining leading levels of financial and non-financial performance, as well as a corporate culture defined by responsible business practice. Rowan is currently leading a project to position the bank as a national brand aligned to the expectations of Australia's socially aware consumer segment. Rowan was an original member of the Al Gore Climate Change Project and is a director on a number of industry and community sector boards. These days he resides between Australia and Italy, where together with his partner they have both embraced Italy's strong commitments to community values and to cooperative enterprise. Would you welcome Rowan, please?
Thank you, Jeremy. And I would also like to start.
Sorry, can I just turn your lapel?
Turn my lapel. Thank you.
Sorry. We're going to have to take care. Sorry, can I
That's
just
okay.
do that? It's just the equipment doesn't.
That's fine. The small room, you might be able to hear me anyway. No. Terrific. Thank you. Can you hear me up the back? Yes, I can see heads nodding, so that's good. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, both past and present, and I pay my respects to the elders. Thanks for turning up tonight. It's always a bit nerve-wracking being invited to come along. I'm calling this perhaps a conversation more so than a lecture. The fear of turning up to a lecture or a conversation and having nobody in the room kind of keeps me awake at night sometimes. But so it's nice to see the room almost full. Thank you for finding a moment in your very, very busy lives to come along and to listen to the information I'm going to share with you, and hopefully participate in a conversation as well. It's also a little intimidating, I think, coming onto a university campus to make a presentation. There's every chance that you in the room know more about the subject than I do. I'm hoping that I might be able to share with you perhaps a unique or a different perspective on this topic of business, the role of business and the diversity of business that I think countries, economies, both have an opportunity to develop and participate in. I'm going to cover 4 subjects in this presentation. We're going to talk about business and sustainability. I don't need to define sustainability to this audience, obviously. That's a plus. I'm not sure that everybody yet has a clear definition of the term sustainability. I'm going to talk about the importance of business and trust, or perhaps the lack of trust in business. And I'm going to refer to some quite recent data around this issue of trust and business, and why I think the connection between trust, business and sustainability is so critically important. We're also then going to move into this area around people-centred economies and the importance of business diversity. And I'm going to follow that up with some conversation around cooperative and mutual enterprise. I'm not going to focus a lot on bankmecu, although I will touch on our business model, and perhaps in questions, when we have the opportunity to have some questions and discussions, we might draw a bit more out around bankmecu and our business model. I think at the moment there seems to be a lot of rethinking going on about the role of business. I was talking to Jeremy just before I came into the room this evening about social impact investment. My sense is that there is a hunger for looking at different forms of business. Some of the words down the bottom of this slide, B corporation, shared value, social enterprise, social entrepreneur, social impact investment, cooperative divestment, shareholder activism, sustainability and new economy is kind of the new language that's emerging. At the same time as this new language is emerging and this interest, I think, is building, there seems to be incredibly complex, or a credible high level of complexity around the subject, and I'm not sure that that's a good thing. I'm probably an advocate for simplicity as opposed to complexity, because I think whilst we have this complexity, the opportunity to influence change is more difficult. Whether that's change in an academic environment or whether that's change in a corporate environment, this level of complexity, I think, can sometimes be overwhelming. When I talk about complexity, I kind of like putting this slide up. I don't know why. I've been using this slide for about a decade because I kind of think it's whoever designed it clearly is clever. And I like the little TV set there that says no all the time. It comes up. There's no purpose of this slide other than the fact that I think it describes complexity more clearly, perhaps, than I can. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. Jeremy provided some insights into who I am. I am the biggest loser on our executive team. What I mean by that is, for some of you who I know, I'm looking a little different. In fact, if you recognise, you might not recognise me. There was a photo of me, I think, in the invitation to come along here. That was me back in September, and I weighed 30 kilos heavier than I do today. These trousers that I'm wearing, I bought these trousers 15 years ago in Paris. They didn't fit me 15 years ago, but I said, one day I'm going to fit into those trousers. So sustainability runs through my veins. Can I throw anything out? 15 years, I got into the trousers. Now they're kind of too big. In fact, if you're looking at me when I'm wandering around, I think, God, the guy doesn't dress terribly well. His clothes are all too big for him. They are. I'm kind of saving up to take everything to a tailor, get it done once. I went from 115 kilos down to 85 kilos. I'm where I want to be, and now I've got to go off to the tailor to get stuff done. So I'm the biggest loser in my exec team. We had this competition where we would lose weight for charity. And so the Victorian Women's Trust did very well out of me. I won the competition. I'm also what I describe as a FIFO worker. My donga is in Italy. It's not a crate sitting somewhere up northern Queensland or in Western Australia. I live these days between Italy and Australia. Unfortunately, I spend too much time in the office and not enough time in Italy. But every 6 months I go back to a village in Italy, which I think kind of gets it. Now, not a lot's happened in my little village over the last 400 years, other than an absolute focus on a sense of community. Now, I go there because it's like living in a Fellini movie. I see all these different generations of people coming and going, and they've been gracious enough to allow me to come and live inside their community. It's a wonderful, wonderful place, and it allows me, I think, to be more centred in my career as an executive within the bank. The kind of conversations that I had, I built a house over there, and I said to the builder, why would you put, and I didn't ask, but why would you put granite sill tiles into all of my windows? And he said, well, what do you do in Australia? I said, well, you don't put granite in sill window tiles. He goes, well, you don't build houses the last 400 years in Australia? It's just a kind of different way of looking at life, and I love it. My colleagues and I, we built Australia's first customer-owned bank. We're kind of proud of that. I set out in this sector, this banking sector, about 2 decades ago with the ambition. I kind of couldn't understand why there was not a cooperative bank here in Australia like there is in other parts of the world. So we set our sights on building Australia's first cooperative bank, and my colleagues and I have achieved that. As Jeremy said, I once spent a weekend with Al Gore and his wife. There was kind of 50 of us, not 3 of us in the room. But that was okay. It was a fabulous experience. I was the first intake of the Australian Conservation Foundation's Climate Change Ambassador program, so I had the opportunity to go around the country just after the Inconvenient Truth movie and talk to people about climate change and what that meant. And that's going back probably almost 10 years ago, maybe it is 10 years ago, at a point in time when not a lot of people were kind of understanding the issues around climate change. But it helped reshape, I think, some of the directions that the bank has taken. And you can see, just by looking at me, that I'm closer to the end of my career than at the beginning. But that's okay, because when I hang up my shingle for the very last time, I go back to my village in Italy and live a very, very simple, peaceful life. That's a bit about me, but I'd kind of like to know a little bit about you. Put your hand up, perhaps, if you see that's a glass half empty. Wow. Wow. So you all see this as a glass half full? Full. Fantastic. Fantastic. Boy, I am amongst a professional group of sustainability warriors, I think. There's an apology before I show you the next slide. The next slide's got a lot of text in it. I generally don't like I'm presenting text into slides, but this one's got a lot of text. Now, I can either read it or read it out, or you can read it. Interestingly, when I looked down the Centre's website over the weekend, I noticed that you had also put up on your homepage part of this quote. I put it in there because it relates to my own sector, my own industry, banking. And it was from Paul Hawkins. He gave an opening address at the University of Portland and back in 2009. Do you want to read it? Yeah, just read that. Take a moment and have a read of that. Can you see that? It's a lovely, lovely quote. I like people who are wordsmiths, and I think that is absolutely, that's got clarity, it's got power, it's got meaning. It resonates with me because I'm in the business of banking. I'm not sure that I'd describe myself as a banker, but I can show to you that bankmecu is we're on the side of healing, not stealing. I think that's fundamentally important. And as we go through this presentation, I hope you'll get an insight into why we think that is fundamentally important. We exist to create prosperity for people and planet. We think shared value is fundamental to any business, whether it's a cooperative, mutual or investor-owned business. The creation of shared value is in our book, all about sustainability. We were originally formed as the CSIRO Staff Credit Union back in 1957. It's kind of nice to get out of the office at the moment. Jeremy touched on taking the bank in a direction where we're going to reposition the bank later this year as a national bank. But we never take sight of the fact that we were formed in 1957 as the CSIRO Staff Credit Union. And interestingly, even though the bank has changed significantly, and now we have around 130 customers on whose behalf we manage around $3.5 billion, so we're still a tiny bank. The people who own this bank, so our customers are our owners, are still people like yourselves. People who we describe, perhaps you don't describe yourselves this way, but we describe you as socially aware, socially progressive. People who care about stuff. So we have this group of 130 customers who own the bank who care about stuff. And what I like about that is that the fact that the business has grown significantly since 1957, we still exist to create prosperity for people and planet, and we still service a group of people who are socially aware. We're also incredibly strong and profitable. The thing we miss out on is scale. Now, $3.5 billion is a small bank, so we don't have scale, but we're incredibly strong. And it's the sustainability piece that does make us incredibly strong. And I'm going to touch on this in a second. We've got a bung name. Jeremy, thank you for pronouncing it bankmecu tonight, because I can kind of get everything. I get bankmecu, I get mecu, I get all sorts of things. So we're going to kind of fix that problem later this year.
Judy trained me to say it.
Did you? I kind of feel, I was wondering whether you'd been pre-briefed. You had? Yeah, okay. Otherwise you would have said mecu, wouldn't you? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Let me let you in on a secret. You can't take this piece of information outside the room. Please. I'm sharing it with you in confidence. But we own the trademark, two trademarks. We own two registered business names, and as of next Thursday, I hope I also own the trademark for one of two names, and the second we're hoping that will come in about a month's time. We own the registered name. We're going through this convoluted trademark process, global trademark process. So by the end of the year, all things going right, bankmecu will be known as Bank of Australia is one option, or Bank Australia. And that's about getting a name that is strong, that is clear, that people won't mispronounce. It's kind of unambiguous, and it will position the bank to take on a national focus. So you're the first to kind of hear that. The staff know about that, but it's the first time I've mentioned that in public. Hopefully I don't have some very smart IP lawyer gazump me in the next 72 hours or so, and if we don't, well then that's what the bank will be known before the end of the year. We are also members, Jeremy said, a member of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. I want to introduce you to the Global Alliance for Banking on Values in a moment. So I've got a very, very short video to show you about the Global Alliance. This is an alliance of 25 banks around the world. You don't apply, you have to be invited to. It was actually established by the royal family in Netherlands. And they invite banks to become part of the alliance. And this global alliance is an independent network of banks using finance to deliver sustainable development for unserved people, communities, and the environment. So I'm going to show now a video, very brief video, just to give you a sense of what it is that this alliance does. We're going to introduce you to Ralph. I'd encourage you at some stage go. Oh, that's cute.
I'm down here. And I'm a banker. Not when I grow up, not for make-believe, now. Actually, did you know, you and me, we're all bankers. I used
That's right.
This is what you get from going from a Mac to a PC.
Don't you hate that?
I'm Ralph,
I can't get the screen.
That's okay.
Okay,
and I'm a banker.
just wait here.
Yeah.
Not when I grow up, not for make-believe, now. Actually, did you know, you and me, we're all bankers. I used to put my coins in a money box and they just sat there doing nothing. But I learned that my money could work for me and help the planet. So now, I put my money in a savings account at a values-based financial institution. Why? Because I want to create positive economic, social, and environmental change in my community and around the world. And this is a great way to do it. Okay, let me tell you what I mean. Where you bank really matters. Did you know that big change happens with small transactions? It does. Trust me. My money doesn't just sit there anymore. It can help me buy a sweet new bike. It can help you buy a home, save for retirement, invest for good returns, or be a business tycoon. By banking on values, we choose to put our money in a place that believes in putting you and me first. Think of it as magically multiplying your money to finance not only the things you need, but things the planet and your community needs too. This kind of banking makes total sense. It's growing. This is a global movement with millions of people like you and me pooling our money to do great things. So go ahead, be proud about how you're changing the world. Feel good about it. There is no trade-off. This is serious banking with a serious feel-good factor. So whether you're an adult or a kid like me, we're all bankers. It's our money that makes this world go round. So tell your neighbors, tell your friends, hey, tell the world! We have the power to choose banking on values.
That gives you just a brief insight. Please take the time at some stage to go and have a look at the GABV website and you'll see some of the projects that we're doing around the world. The 25 banks are in each continent around the world, both developed and developing countries. And as I said, we were invited to participate, become a member of the Alliance. Now, the investments that we're making, they can be in everything from organic agriculture, solar energy, community housing. In developed countries, they can be in microfinance, a whole range of microfinance projects. So the diversity is quite amazing. And we are looking, as the Alliance is looking for new members around the world constantly. So it will continue to grow. In April last year, I had the opportunity to go and complete the Sustainability Leadership Program at Cambridge University, which was an eye-opener, I guess, in many senses. And whilst during that particular week we had conversations around the kinds of issues that you would expect, that we would have conversations around climate and biodiversity loss, I walked away with 4 key important sustainability directions in my mind, and I want to kind of build some of these into tonight's conversation. The importance of equity in a sustainable planet. The importance of democracy. You guys kind of know a lot about democracy after your most recent state election. The power of democracy to influence change. Simplicity as opposed to complexity, and cooperation. And I walked away from that week at Cambridge thinking there are some mega trends, I guess, that are beginning to emerge that are going to be inextricably linked to anybody that's working in the sustainability area. I think this issue around equity is fundamentally important. Now, we're witnessing an economic divide. The richest 1% of the population will own more than half the world's wealth by 2016. That's very recent data. You probably saw it from Oxfam in January last month. 80 of the world, not 80%, but 80 of the world's richest people are as wealthy as the poorest half of the world. 6 years ago, the global economy nearly collapsed. Now, it's interesting because the GFC didn't have as big an impact initially on Australia that it did in other parts of the world. But now big corporations in the States and the wealthy are recovering. America's richest 7% of people gained $5.6 trillion in assets between 2009 and 2011, while the other 93% lost a combined $669 billion. That's phenomenal. I think the impact that we saw is only starting to come out, and perhaps it is an equity issue, a related issue as well. You will recall that an outcome here in Australia of the GFC was that the Commonwealth Bank was allowed to acquire Bankwest, which was owned by Halifax Bank of Scotland, and Westpac Bank acquired St George Bank in New South Wales. Now, pundits say that if a GFC, in fact, not even pundits, ASIC says that in no other circumstances other than the GFC would they have allowed that to have occurred. And what we now see in this country is that 80% of all of the banking in this country is held by 4 major banks. The rest of us are playing for 20% market share. Now, the equity issue starts to come into this and has been identified in the most recent financial systems inquiry, the FSI inquiry. As a consequence of this incredibly intense or concentrated market share, we're now starting to see change in market power, and some of that is starting to influence the most vulnerable people in our communities. So it occurred internationally, and now it's occurring nationally. And I think this is leading not only to an economic divide, but a social divide. Whilst this is the Occupy Wall Street movement, it kind of makes it quite stark, the polarisation, the differences that are occurring. Not only is it creating, I think, a social divide, but it's creating a trust deficit. And it's this trust deficit that I think is inextricably linked to our commitment to more sustainable businesses and more sustainable economies. After all, now, overall trust in business globally stands at 57%. Even worse is the level of trust in the leadership of businesses, which stands at a dismal 20%. So here we are, a group of people committed to more sustainable environments and economies, and we're relying on business to influence positive change and create shared value at a time when the vast majority of businesses aren't trusted and leaders are trusted even less. I'm going to use some data here that's put up by the Edelman Trust Barometer, really recent data. They do this each year. Again, if you want to go onto their website, they've got fabulous presentations of the data that they do. They interview 27,000 people across the country and an additional 6,000 people who are socially aware. So in total, just over 30,000 people. So the data is very, very solid, and they've been doing it for a number of years. So it's interesting to have a look at the trends. I just want to pull out a couple of pieces of data from the Edelman Trust Barometer that I think starts to point or raise concerns around the opportunity that business actually does have to create more sustainable economies and countries. Have a look at the perceived drivers of business. Technology is the largest. Business growth targets, greed and money, personal ambition are all stronger perceived drivers of business than improving people's lives or making the world a better place. Now, that's both disappointing, but I think also it represents an opportunity as well for enlightened businesses as well. Like businesses like our own and in the Alliance, because I think we do have the opportunity to change the way businesses are perceived. And I'm going to touch on in a moment how I think that might be possible. Let me introduce you to, I think this is Tony is probably my poster boy for leaders who are not trusted. Does anyone recognise Tony? Yeah? Who's Tony?
That's the former CEO of BP.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Between the Deepwater Horizon tragedy where...
He left that job and went on to do fracking work.
Fracking, did he? Now I thought he would have gone shoveling snow in Siberia, but sadly not. I'm going to actually share with you at a tick. He's moved on from fracking. Yeah, no, he's moved on from fracking. He's done very well for himself, Tony. Interestingly, because the Deepwater Horizon cost BP $42 billion, destroyed shareholder value for a period of time. The US court findings was that BP were grossly negligent and guilty of reckless conduct. Now, my poster boy, Tony Hayward, now is the non-executive chairman of Glencore, one of the world's largest global diversified natural resource companies, employing 200,000 people, and last year had a salary of $4.5 million. So fracking didn't pay enough. Shoveling snow in Siberia was too cold. So Tony's moved on. But you wonder why business leaders are not trusted when that's the outcome of $42 billion cost to BP. Don't put a value on Lev and Dead. Don't put a value on the environment that was caused as a consequence of the Deepwater Horizon blowing up. And what did Tony do? Tony was one of those guys who, let's go back. Where was Tony? Tony was here because Tony kind of put everything at risk in order to generate shareholder value for BP, and instead Tony destroyed it. And we're looking at a trust issue. In fact, businesses can either build or destroy trust. Some of the reasons that, again, come through the Edelman Trust Survey or Barometer, reasons for trust in business has increased, drivers of trust increasing, produces economic growth, allows me to be a productive member of society, contributes to greater good. They are the drivers of trust in business. The destroyers of trust in business fails to contribute to greater good, 53%, lacks economic growth, 39%, or does not help my family live a more fulfilling life. Kind of interesting. Let's have a look again, some of the data that's coming through from this Edelman survey around trust drivers. Now, how important is it that a business listens to its customers, that a business puts customers before its profit, that a business protects the environment, that a business produces consistent financial returns, and that a business addresses social need? From the 33,000 people interviewed in this survey, they put importance, listening to customers and customers before profit, and protects the environment and addresses social need ahead of constant financial returns. That's importance. And then you can see the number of performance. So listening to customers, woeful. Customers before profit, woeful. Protects the environment, even less woeful, or more woeful. And addresses society's need, woeful again. So importance and performance is not matching. I think that there is this interesting tension in business, in investor-owned business in particular. And I think the data that's coming through from the Edelman survey brings us to consider this question: what is the purpose of business? Is it to solely maximise shareholder value, or is it to provide goods and services that customers needs and wants? It becomes more complex, though, I think, because there's this increasing expectation on business and boards, particularly boards of management and investors, who are now expected to address an array of social, economic and environmental challenges. And I just wonder in this business model whether there is an inbuilt tension between the priority to satisfy the need for the shareholder, the priority to satisfy the need for the customer, and the role of the company or the role of the business. I think there is this tension building as a consequence of the model, the menage a trois between customer, shareholder, and company. An interesting option, in fact, might be, or a question might be, can business achieve all of this together? Can it maximise shareholder value and, rather than or, provide goods and services that customers need and want, whilst or by addressing an array of social, economic and environmental challenges? I think that's the opportunity that exists for business and the opportunity by which business can create trust. But I think those of us that are working in the sustainability area have fundamentally actually failed to see business through this eye. And my reflection on this is as a result of us being unable to really articulate the business case for sustainable enterprise. Now, the facts aren't clear enough. And I think now I'm responsible for that. I think we should be doing a far better job of articulating the business case around responsible business, that businesses can maximise shareholder value and provide goods and services by addressing an array of social, economic and environmental challenges. And I don't think that degree of clarity currently exists, but it needs to in order for the planet to become and economies to become more sustainable.
If I can comment, I think looking over a long period of employment, that there's been a move from a fairly long-term focus from business leaders. The chairman was to me with further in the future with Rob Blake, who thinks he's going to lose his job in a couple of years' time. Has got a if he doesn't maximise shareholder value in the next 6 months, he's gone.
Yeah, that's right. Or quarterly reporting in some cases. Quarterly reporting. Crikey. Not long-term shareholder value creation, but quarterly reporting. Imagine being put under that pressure, that you report to the market performance on a quarterly basis rather than looking at long-term. There is a consequence to this, though, because the customer is not silly. Neither is some investors not silly. You'll be aware of the global divestment movement. Some of you may have participated in the global divestment movement. What we're seeing now as a consequence of the global divestment movement, we're seeing customers shifting their money, and then we're seeing investors shifting their investments too. The one that's occurring here moment in Australia is the divestment away from banks that invest cash in fossil fuels. How many of you know what the bank does with your hard-earned cash? One, two, three. But the vast majority, that tells me that the vast majority don't know what a bank is doing, how your cash is being invested. Would that be fair to say? In fact, the vast majority of people who I ask that question have actually never even thought about it. But there is a group of people now who are saying, okay, I'm a customer or I'm a small shareholder. I do have some power. I do want to make some decisions around where my money is invested. So I'm going to shift my money from a bank that invests in coal or invests in fossil fuel extraction into a bank that doesn't. A bank that we don't, as you would expect. It shouldn't come as a surprise to you that we don't invest any direct investment into fossil fuel. And as a consequence of that, we have got record levels of new customer acquisition. People who are coming out of the four major banks and saying we don't want our money invested in fossil fuel. But interestingly, we're seeing that conversation move beyond fossil fuel at the moment into areas like, I don't want my money invested into gambling. I don't want my money invested into pornography. I don't want my money invested into a whole range of areas as a negative screen. The positive screen around that is we are having more and more conversations, and we're going to touch on a couple of projects here in a tick, where customers are saying, I actually want to participate in the decisions about where the bank invests my money because I want my money invested in this. So we're starting to see this process of engagement occur both at a customer level but also at an investor level. Because this is another consequence of deteriorating levels of trust, that shareholders go feral. This is a quote from the Harvard Business Review from January 2010 to September 2013. The number of interventions by activist shareholders challenging board decisions increased an astonishing 88%. Now, the shareholders, particularly the small shareholders, are starting to get angry. They're starting to realise that They do have the capacity to influence a change. We're kind of seeing this closer to home too. You might have seen this issue starting to bubble away here in Australia. This is an issue around the federal government planning to abolish the right, there's currently a right under the Corps Act, for 100 shareholders or more to call a company meeting. This is what the ANZ and the CBA had to say. Major banks, Commonwealth Bank of Australia and ANZ, have urged the government to repeal a law which allows activist investors, unions and environmental groups to pursue fringe causes by forcing companies to hold costly shareholder meetings. That's what the banks have said. Investor-owned banks have said. This is what the other side has said. General meetings are to companies what elections are to democracy. They are of critical importance. Any proposal to abolish the limited rights of shareholders should be soundly rejected. I saw this, I thought, there's that theme from Cambridge coming forward around the importance of democracy in creating a more sustainable environment, planet, economy. And it's happening here right on our own doorstep. Now let's look at a different kind of business where it's not a menage a trois, it's not a shareholder, a company and a customer, but it's a shareholder and customer and company. The cooperative and mutual enterprise, or CMEs, I think go some way to resolving the tension that exists in shareholder-owned or investor-owned businesses. What do you think might be some of the ramifications of a business model that combines the shareholder and customer together? So it's a partnership between an individual. And Jeremy said he's a customer of the bank. That's true. But every customer of the bank is an owner of the bank as well. They're a shareholder in the bank. The difference is they only own one share. There's no dominant shareholder. What might the difference be in terms of the way this company thinks compared to that company? Any thoughts? Any ideas?
It's fundamentally democratic.
It's fundamentally democratic. Yep, that's right. Now, when we sit together in our company, the bank, whether it's at the executive team or at the board level, or at any level, really, across the bank, we don't have this murkiness between do we exist in order to maximise profits for a shareholder? Are the decisions that we are making benefiting the shareholder but disadvantaging the customer? That conversation never takes place because they are the one and the same. It means, to pick your point up, we're not looking at producing short-term profits for shareholders. We're looking at creating long-term value for customers who own the bank. And it does take away, that model takes away some of that tension. It's kind of the area that interests us at the moment is the capacity that model has, that CME model, the cooperative and mutual enterprise model, has to take advantage of or invest in this shift that's occurring in, or the development of a people-centred economy. The Guardian last month identified 6 big shifts. Some of you might have seen the article. The shifts that they identified: local food grows everywhere. No, it's the farmers market. It's the slow food. It's the local food. It's the low food miles movement. The second shift they identified was more workers own their own jobs. Now, I own my own job because I'm also a customer and a shareholder of the bank. So I own my own job. I met a group of women a couple of weeks ago up in Canberra. They are aged care workers. The aged care industry is not well known for looking after its employees. It's a pretty tough existence. It's a pretty lowly paid occupation. And most of the aged care in this country is now moving across into private ownership. And this group of women said, we're about providing a level of care for elderly people based on dignity, not based on maximising profits for investor-owned companies. So this group of women have decided to set up their own cooperative to run aged care in Sydney. And they own their own jobs. So they look at the business differently. They look at it with a long-term horizon. The elderly people become part of the cooperative. So they're a shareholder in the cooperative and a customer of the cooperative. So again, the model lacks the tension. It's about looking at creating long-term shareholder value. Now, the largest cooperative in the world, is in Spain. Some of you might know this already. Mondragon employs 70,000 people. Phenomenal. When Europe went through the GFC, Mondragon put off, in fact, I think this is right. Stand corrected, but I think this is right. It actually didn't put off anybody. It got this group of employees, 70,000 people together, and said the best thing because Mondragon is spread out across Spain, and Mondragon is in larger cities and very small communities as well. And it said during the GFC, the best thing that we can do is keep people in jobs. So as people who own Mondragon, employees own their jobs, what's the thing that we can do? They all agreed to reduce their salaries to a level where the cooperative could still be profitable, which meant that they could still stay in jobs, maintain their lives, and invest money back into the communities. So it just kind of makes sense. The third big shift that the Guardian article picked up on was the economy goes DIY, do it yourself. And we're seeing that in things like Airbnb now. This sense of community owned. We're seeing a lot more of that occurring. The fourth, money grows more responsible. We just touched on that in terms of divestment. People want a good rate of return on their money. I used to once think that doing good was an opportunity to have a premium on the price. So in our case, you would not have to pay as much for deposits, and you could probably charge a little bit for loans because you were doing good with the money. That's not true. There is no price premium in doing good. The value is created in how you invest the money. That's how the value is created. But there is absolutely a growing interest now in money grows more responsibly. And we're asking ourselves the question, does this business model better attune itself to investing money more responsibly than the investor-owned model? Some homes stay more affordable. Now look at the housing situation in this country. We use housing as an opportunity to create wealth. So for those of us lucky enough to own a home, our home ownership is part of our wealth accumulation strategy in order to be able to finance our retirement. That's quite unique. That's not occurring in Italy, I've got to tell you, or in many other parts of the world where they use homes to the extent. And they do have models. They have great models. Community land trusts, where the land is owned by local government and leased back to communities who put the houses on them. About 13% of all the housing in Europe is cooperatively owned housing. Housing's not seen as a way of accumulating wealth. Now, we take it to even a more bizarre level where we provide tax incentives to investors to buy homes in order to be able to make a loss in negative gear. That they actually don't have to add housing stock to the market. They just have to buy a house and put a tenant in it as a tax deduction. There are more responsible ways to provide affordable housing and security of tenure. I'm going to touch on that in a tick. And the sixth trend, or the six big shifts, is the innovation that's emerging now around how we protect our assets or protect our resources. And I think one of the key elements of that is around placing a value on natural capital. We've just financed a piece of work which starts to place a value on all the natural capital within the state of Victoria in order that the Victorian economy can understand its vulnerabilities to deteriorating natural capital. Now, the really interesting piece of outcome for that piece of work for me was we actually sat down with investor-owned businesses and asked whether they would contribute to financing that piece of work, and none of them would. Well, I sat at a table, and there was about 8 of us. It was with Environment Victoria. Now, the CEO of Environment Victoria and I had a meeting before the meeting, and she said, "You guys are going to stump up cash for this research, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. We've been in this from day one. This is 6 months down the track. We're not going to walk away from you. We're going to help finance this piece of work." She said, "Okay, because I'm not so certain the others are going to do this because they don't see the value in doing this piece of work. So let's start. I'm going to ask the question. We're going to go around the table. I'm going to start with you, Rowan." So it was all pre-warned, pre-planned. We went into the meeting and Kelly said to me, "Is bankmecu you're going to help finance this work?" And I said, "We've been there from day one. Absolutely. We're going to put our money on the fridge. We're there. We want to see this piece of work through." Kelly then went around the next 7 who are all investor-owned businesses, and they all went, we just kind of think this is a really important piece of work to do, and we just love to be sitting around the table, and we're very committed to providing in-kind support for the research to be able to be done, but things are fairly tough at the moment, and I've got to get this through the finance director, and what's the sponsorship opportunities that are available in this, and kind of think, far out. I'm not clouded by any of that, because I'm not looking at short term, I'm looking at long term. I tell you what, a state, whether it's Queensland or whether it's Victoria, that is a healthy state because it protects its values, it understands the value of its natural capital, is a good state to do business in. But I don't have the same pressures of having to go back to a finance director to say, let's stump up some money to do this piece of work. So I think, again, the tension that might exist in investor-owned businesses doesn't exist to the same extent in CMEs. I want to go back a little way. In fact, I want to go back a long way. I want to go back 150 years and talk about these two guys. Their names are Schultz, Delitzsch and Raferson. Probably not familiar to you. These guys today, I would describe them as social capitalists or social entrepreneurs. What these guys did is they were the pioneers that underpinned the birth of cooperative enterprise. They identified a contemporary social issue of the time. In fact, two. There were 2 groups of people that were unbankable in Europe, in Germany. One were artisans, or we would call tradies probably these days, and the other were farmers. They couldn't be banked. And as a consequence of that, they were suffering extreme levels of poverty. Schultz, Delitzsch and Raferson came to the view that a collective of people that didn't exist for the purpose of maximising profits for investors, but a group of people who came together with a common need, in this case, to be banked in order to be able to invest in their businesses or invest in their farms, could pool their money together and lend it back to each other, and to create a cooperative bank, a cooperative-owned bank. It didn't exist for the purpose of maximising profits for investors. The banks that existed for the purpose of maximising profits for investors wouldn't bank this group of people. This group of people said, we can build a bank, a cooperative-owned bank, on cooperative principles. We'll save our money, we'll invest it back to each other. Any profit that we do make, we invest back into the bank for the purpose of building the bank, for the purpose of the benefit the members of the bank. And off the basis of that piece of logic, the cooperative and mutual sector industries around the world were formed. And I'm going to touch on now, just in a tick, to give you a sense of the size of that sector, the size of this sector around the world, because it's kind of unknown here in Australia. But before I do, what's interesting, I think, about that particular story is that it's a bit of the back to the future. The principles that Schultz, Delitzsch and Raferson applied back in the mid-1800s, I think equally apply today. A clear personal and societal benefits are key to businesses building trust. Their societal issue was a group of people who were unbanked. And a company can take specific actions that both increase profits and improve the economic social conditions in the community where it operates. 81% of the 33,000 people agreed that that was a valid proposition. So let's have a look quickly at these CMEs, these people-centred businesses that we think are fundamentally important in terms of building more sustainable economies, particularly local economies, but large as well. And we're going to touch on some of the size of these businesses in a tick. They have this group of CMEs, cooperatives and mutual enterprises, share what I'm going to show you here in common. It doesn't matter whether you're in banking, whether you're in housing, whether you're in aged care. This group of cooperatives and mutuals around the world share these characteristics in common. The principles: voluntary and open membership, democratic control, one member. It used to always be one member, one vote. That's kind of what we would talk, one member, one vote. No dominating shareholder. Autonomous and independent. So they don't source capital from external sources generally. Capital is retained earnings. So our business is very highly capitalised. It sits on about 20% risk-weighted capital. All of the capital that sits within the bank is retained profits. No debt at all within the business. Another principle is education and training. Working with communities to invest in education and training, building people's capacity. Cooperation amongst cooperatives, we work together, you would kind of think that that makes sense, and concern for community. Now those values there, or those principles there, have been in existence since the 1800s. And they're as true today as they were 150 years ago. The values that underpin all of these businesses: self-help, responsibility, democracy. You know, there's that democracy piece from Cambridge coming through again, as is equity and equality. And ethics. Ethics being a principle in a movement. Open, honest, socially responsible, and caring for others. We all share this same difference. Ownership. Ownership is exclusively for the benefit of members, not investors. We don't have investors. Investors aren't invited inside the tent. Profits, whether back to the business or for the benefit of the community, all profits are reinvested for member benefit. There's no leakage of profit outside the enterprise. The profits stay within the ownership of the business. And control, democratic ownership means decisions are equitable and made for common good, not short-term gain to appease markets or investors. And this is how we go about creating value. Again, we all have this in common. We create employment. We tend to have lower production costs and enhance productivity, innovation, profitability and resilient, and we're more resilient to economic downturn. Cooperatives, mutuals enhance competition and provide market diversity. So often you will see in communities that are struggling, the investor-owned businesses have broken down or left, and the cooperative or mutual enterprise will enter back into the marketplace. Social value. We unleash entrepreneurialism, increase consumer choice and deliver effective social services in markets that are small, remote, complex and specialised. I touched on the aged care one. I've got a 92-year-old father who I visit 3 times a week in a nursing home that's owned by an investor-owned company because I can't find a cooperative one. If I did, I would. In Italy, all the aged care within the region that I live within is all cooperatively owned. So they exist to create this social value, not just economic value. And the third being environmental value. They work for sustainable development of their communities. That's what we've all got in common. Now let me give you a sense of the scale, because I find Australia is somewhat unique in terms of its awareness or lack of awareness of cooperative and mutual enterprise. Let's just touch firstly on global CMEs. CMEs operating, the G20 economies have a turnover similar to the GDP of Italy, quite significant. They employ 250 million people, or 12% of the G20 nations' workforce. CMEs are responsible, as a developing economy, responsible for 25% of the Kenyan GDP. Over 12% of Europe's housing stock, 25 million houses are cooperatively owned, providing people affordable housing and security of tenure. Not a lease that lasts for 12 months and then the landlord boots you out because he's decided to change his investment strategy, but you have a property for life, so security of tenure. 23% of all the global insurance market is provided by CMEs. CMEs account for 1,700 billion, or I think that's $1.7 trillion in annual turnover, and have around 1 billion members. Around 40%. We talked about Schultz-Delitzsch establishing the first cooperative banks in Germany. Germany still has around 40% of its banking done through cooperative banks. Now, did anybody look at the strength of the German economy recently? It's pretty strong.
You can wrap up in about 5 minutes because these people will ask you some
I
questions.
can. 40% in Singapore. Let's just go closer to home. Australia's largest supplier of textbooks, probably on campus, Co-op bookstore. Leading Australian grain exporter. You can see through them. Largest dairy exporter. NRMA, which is a brand that you will know, largest customer-owned enterprise. A quarter of all the spare parts for in the automotive industry provided through a CME. I touched on briefly there the grain grower. I want to give you a sense of the size of the scale and the capacity that some of these social enterprise businesses or CMEs have to be able to influence change. This is a brand that you're probably not familiar with, CBH. Has anybody heard of CBH? You have? Well, that's good. If some, that's good. Cooperative bulk handling. Cooperative bulk handling based out of Western Australia. It's a grower cooperative. It buys grain for growers, small growers and large growers. You only need 200 tonnes of grain in order to be able to be a member of the cooperative. The cooperative, going back to short-term, long-term, as a grower cooperative, it's our sole focus to create and importantly return value to growers. We are not here just to create value for growers now. We're here to create sustainable value for future generations. Future generations, not quarterly reporting, but future generations. Last year, to give you a sense of the scale, the size of some of these businesses, their profit was $142 million. Why is there a picture of a train there? Transport costs within Western Australia were increasing significantly. Transport through rail were increasing significantly. And cooperatives are about reducing the cost of production. So what did they do? They went out and bought a railway. I asked the chairman, I was having dinner with the chairman and he explained the story to me. I said, how did you finance the railway? He said, we paid cash for the railway through retained earnings. He goes, but it doesn't stop there. In order to be able to reduce the cost and make this a sustainable business, and importantly, why is it important to be a sustainable business? It means that growers across Western Australia on small lots can actually stay on their land. You're not seeing small lots amalgamate into large lots, which eventually will be owned by investor-owned or foreign-owned buyers. They can keep their growers on land. Trains, he goes, we fixed trains. He goes, then we had a problem with milling. I said, what did you do with milling? He goes, we bought 4 mills in Cambodia and Vietnam. So we now mill into Asia. I go, well, how do you get the grain from the farm to the train to the mill? He goes, we sold that too. We now control all the shipping as well. And why do they do that? In order to create long-term value for the owners and at a very local level can keep local farmers on their land in small communities in Western Australia, which can contribute to the economy of those communities. Interestingly, I don't know whether this is new. Can I see a kind of nod of the head? Is some of this new to you around CMEs? Yeah. The scale's bigger than you thought. One of the things that I find interesting when in this business, when I get to talk to people, is the extent to which a lot of this knowledge is not known, and the extent to which it's not actually taught. I don't think there's actually. One of you will correct me. But I actually don't think that there is a MBA or a law degree in the country that covers off cooperative or mutual enterprise. Would I be right? Would I be right in saying that?
There's a real shortage of education.
Used to be. Used to be?
Yeah.
How long ago?
Probably up until about 6 years ago.
Okay, long time ago.
So people from Sydney and from
Yep.
Coast and
Yep.
a lot of people attend.
I sat next to a lawyer on a panel last year in Melbourne and he said, you're the bloke from the cooperatives, aren't you? I go, yeah. He goes, I'm just going to let you know as a courtesy, I'm going to ping you on this panel. He goes, I tell people not to form cooperatives or mutual enterprise businesses because I think it's better to stay inside the Corporations Act. You need the protection of the Corporations Act. So for the last 10 years or more, I've been telling people don't set up cooperatives and mutuals for that reason. I go, well, that's kind of interesting because I sit within the Corporations Act. I'm a public unlisted company. I'm governed by the Corporations Act, but I apply the principles of a cooperative and mutual. And he said to me, you're kidding. That's possible? We know we've got an issue. We established last year the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals in order to be able to engage communities and education and universities around some of these. We think it's really important that if you complete a MBA in this country, that you get exposed to a diversity of business forms like CMEs. I just want to give you very quickly, before we go into Q&A, a video. Yep. A video. We're going to do this next video and then we can wrap it up into questions if you like. This is an example. We'll go through the video first and then I'll explain it to you.
our conservation land bank. It's about 1,000 hectares in Victoria's West Wimmera. We've placed a protection on it to make sure it will never be developed.
The land bank is a private nature reserve. It's owned by our customers.
We started our conservation land bank project back in 2008 as a way to put our responsible banking into practice. Our customers use our finance to purchase cars, but cars release carbon emissions. So we're planting trees and protecting them to absorb carbon emissions and restore the balance. Our customers also use our finance to build new homes. We recognise that land and habitat is clear to make way for that new home. So we're protecting the equivalent amount of land in our land bank to balance out that choice. The Kauri Farm Tree Group also play a really important role at our land bank. They provide the on-ground work and also are a really important liaison point between us and the local community.
Probably the best solution that we've had is to draw community groups in, and they do the tree planting. They're paid a fee to plant the trees.
We work with Landcare Australia to project manage the site, and we also work with Trust for Nature, who provide really important conservation advice. We chose these properties because they are home to a number of endangered species, including the southeastern red-tailed black cockatoo and belote trees. We're working to protect their natural habitat, and we're really hoping to see their numbers increase over time.
Owning the conservation land bank not only helps to focus us on our business, but we hope to also encourage other businesses to think about how they might reduce the impact that they're having on society and the environment.
So if you look behind me and see the trees that are being put in now, and some that were put there over the last 2 years, in 10 years' time they'll probably, well, I would be hoping that they'd be probably 7 metres high, and it looks more like a forest than an open paddock.
We're really happy with the progress we've made, and I really can't wait to see the land bank in another 10 years.
That project came about as a consequence of a conversation that we had initially with the Australian Conservation Foundation that said, or asked the question, said, you guys finance new home construction in the peri-urban areas of cities around the country? And we said, yes, we do. We do that. And they said, well, you finance some of those homes with our money, and as a consequence of financing some of those homes, there is a loss of biodiversity as those new suburbs get developed. So what can we do together as a bank, and I'm an owner in the bank, to be able to put a product out in the marketplace that helps offset the loss of biodiversity associated with new home construction? And at the same time, can we use that property or that development, that initiative, to offset all the carbon that the bank generates? And can we also offset all the carbon that the motor vehicles that we finance emit as well? And we go, crikey, let's turn our mind to that. And as a consequence of that ask from the customers, not just the ACF, but a number of our customers, we built this property and we're building them. The amazing outcomes with that particular property is that we purchased a property that was very degraded, that had once had high conservation values, had endangered species on it, where we had a local community that could call it their own, that we could employ the local community. We had a local Indigenous community that we could engage on that property. And now when we go up to those properties, they describe it as their land bank, not the bank's land bank, which I kind of think is a really a positive unofficial KPI, that the local community own the land bank property. I show you that, Dave, because it's a really simple example of being able to empower customers through their money, to make positive change in community. So we've got a conservation property, we're protecting biodiversity, we're employing local people, we're engaged Indigenous community, and we're actually now taking our customers out onto the property as well, and staff. So it's kind of been a win-win-win. Now, interestingly, we're the only provider of finance anywhere in the world that offsets the loss of biodiversity associated with new home construction. The only one in the world. The conversations that we had with investor-owned banks around this particular project is, what's the return on investment? What's the return on equity? How do you make this thing work? It was a different conversation because our conversation was around adding value to the community. It was around long-term investments. It was around building a responsible bank that could attract customers to the bank in order to give them options to invest their money responsibly. So that's a shared value project. That creates shared value across the environment, across community. It doesn't create investor value. And it adds to the reputation of the business. One example, we could give you a lot of examples, but I'm looking at the clock and we don't have long to go and we want to go to the Q&A, and Jeremy's staring me down. So maybe in Q&A I'll get the opportunity to talk about another project, but I'm yours.
In the normal circumstances, I would have invited you about 15 minutes ago, but you were sharing such interesting stuff. I thought I'd let you go. But I know there are going to be a barrage of questions now, so I'm going to brace myself. Do I need the mic on? Will it get picked up? Well, then don't bother. Question. Please identify yourself and affiliation if you have one.
Hi, my name is Virginia Phelps, and I'm a colleague of Dr. Mark Blaisbrook, who came and spoke here a few months ago on purpose business as well. So I'd be very interested in doing that together at some point. Absolutely fantastic presentation. Thank you very much. I was particularly, a lot of things struck me. One, the irony is that I used to work at BP, and Dr. Mark Blaisbrook.
I thought you were going to say you were from NAB tonight.
I saw in a lot of your graphics, and again, the Edelman information, all that fantastic. I saw a lot of company, shareholder, customer, company. I think what we're trying to do is get to the next level down and think of the company in terms of actually employees. And we have a real belief that every employee, i.e. people who have to go to work every day, because most people do, have a real desire to understand what their purpose actually is at work and actually act on it. And what I'm really interested in hearing from you is that the CME model and the cooperative is absolutely fantastic. I can see that you're empowering people. You're talking about unleashing entrepreneurialism. We are trying to think about how to do that too within a corporate environment, because we really do believe that things, as we've said a number of times, there can be a very strong business case for doing things in a socially and environmentally responsible manner. But how do you see the future of that in terms of within the corporate environment, as compared to what you're doing?
Yeah, let's put it into the corporate environment and the part that you mentioned around engaging the workforce, the employees, and the culture around that. I think fundamentally important. I didn't understand this 12 years ago, 13 years ago, when I sat down with the board and talked to them about we're going to push this bank, this credit union, become a bank further and further into the sustainability piece. I wasn't clear on the business case for why we would make that decision. So to the credit of the board, they put faith in what we thought was the appropriate strategy going forward. The employee part is absolutely fundamental. Let me tell you what I know now that I didn't know 10, 11, 12, 13 years ago. The culture of the business is fundamentally important. The sustainability and the values piece is a driver for commitment within the workforce. What I now know is that there's a correlation between commitment and engagement. I know there's a correlation between commitment and engagement and productivity. I know that there's a correlation between commitment, engagement, productivity, and cost management, or productivity, cost management within the business. And in our business, what that means is that we have the capacity to be able to price our product very well in order to create value for our customers, who are also our shareholders. So we have the lowest cost-to-income ratio of any mutual banking institution, whether it's a building society or a credit union or a bank in this country. And the driver behind that is values. So I create value for the customers who are in the bank as a consequence of the values inside the bank which engage the workforce. And just that simple piece, that simple piece of experience is something that should also resonate with an investor-owned business as well.
Because you talked about natural capital, and we should also, I think, talk about human capital.
Correct.
Because it is absolutely core.
Yep, correct.
So,
I also know that if I look at my customer, a customer who shops on values, so put it back into what might spark the investor's interest. A customer who shops on values is what I call less promiscuous. That means in my sector, they have fewer banking relationships. So a customer who banks with bankmecu to become Bank Australia, banks with us on values. And once they get a values alignment, they stay with us and they refer then their circle of influence, their friends to us as well. So my cost of acquisition is really low and they're not promiscuous. They have a single banking relationship. Now, investor-owned banks would equally benefit from just that piece of knowledge.
That's another question. Thank you for your question. The gentleman at the back, just identify yourself.
Through business school and also shareholder, bankmecu, member of bankmecu. And I can update you on your post where Glencore is making a very bad name for itself at Collinsville and Central.
They're right.
But my question is about your internal processes. And as a bank, you'll get people coming along saying, we want some money to run this project or run this business, or suggesting invest equity in a business or whatever. And I'm wondering, what are the systems you have in place to make judgments about those?
Yep.
What information do you draw upon to determine what's the climate impact
Yep.
of a project or a company?
Yep.
What performance management systems do you have in relation to the staff who are looking at these decisions? What reward systems do you have in place? How do you basically internally manage these issues about sustainability and climate concerns?
Yeah, they're all good challenges, and some of them are sitting in the room here tonight, so you might want to add something to it. And I think there's probably two elements to it. There's the customer element, and then there's the internal culture and capacity building element. Let me just touch really briefly on the customer element first. The customer element, this bank, I'll just go this bank. This is a bank that reflects the attitudes, the values, the needs and expectations of its customers who own the bank. So in terms of the investments that we make, we have, not perfect, but we have, for a bank of our size, very well developed customer engagement processes in place in order to be able to identify where our customers want to invest and where they don't want us to invest. As we build scale, we'll build capacity into that area. In terms of the staff, all the staff, whether it's the managing director or a person on the counter, has built into their position descriptions a responsibility and accountability for sustainability. So it's embedded into the way that we design positions. Is it perfect? No, it's not. And we recognise that it's not perfect. And we've just changed the structure of the bank in order to position ourselves for this growth going forward. So our people and culture area has now just come to be part of my division, corporate development. Development's moved to corporate development in order that we can build those capabilities that will take the bank forward. And the capabilities are around people and culture. And whilst the sustainability positioning now is a driver of engagement and commitment and business outcome, I think we can do better in that area. When we go and we measure, we assess the culture of the business each year, the one element that staff say they are committed to, they kind of get out of bed 4 in the morning other than their salary check, is that they feel as if they're part of something bigger working for the bank. They feel that there is a purpose beyond simply making profit for shareholders, that this bank that they're part of, they own their job, they're a customer and owner of the bank, contributes something positive to the community that they work in. And it's that sense of purpose that helps define the culture of the bank. We don't yet have all the systems in place. At a $3.5 billion bank with 350 people, we don't have yet all the systems in place. And we recognise that. That's why people and culture is coming into development, so that we can get that much closer alignment between internal culture, capability building, so that it's built into the REM strategy. The REM strategy at the moment is an interesting one because I think we're one of the only banks in the country that pays no bonuses to any executive. None. Zero. We're not motivated. In fact, there's a number of things. Now, we don't offshore jobs. We don't pay bonuses to executive. In fact, there is a group of people who we pay bonuses to. It's the most junior grade staff in the bank. So we're like bureaucracy, grade 1 to grade 6. Nobody above grade 1 gets paid a bonus. Grade 1 gets a bonus. Nobody else gets a bonus. And that helps define culture within the business. So there's a lot of elements, but it's an area where we're going to do better.
Lady in the front here. Left hand raised, yes.
Hi, I'm Mary Bissett. I have my own business now, Creative Leadership Corporation, it's called. What you're describing in terms of the staff still sounds like the structure of hierarchy, other than what you think the logical consequence of what you've been talking about, which would be more what they call hierarchy, more network-based.
Yeah. So we're trialling some new things at the moment. So within my area, corporate development, the division now, we've taken actually the org structure away. We have a pool of people, which we're trying. So this is a group of people who once there was an org tree, org structure, so your top, bottom. We kind of took that away and we're trialling that in corporate development. So there's a pool of people who we now call consultants, all on an equal level, and people across the business, depending on what their need is for communications or research or data analytics, can access the pool. The pool works together as an autonomous, a semi-autonomous team. It determines its priorities, it determines how it's going to manage its performance, it's determining its resource, it's determining its development strategies at the moment. A young group of people, so we're investing in their development. They've never supervised or never worked with where they have to make decisions, responsible for making kinds of decisions that we're asking them to make. But that's working very well for us. We're doing an assessment on that culture quarterly, and we're into Q3 at the moment, and the Q3 survey just shows these guys are really embraced it. So productivity's gone up, engagement again's gone up, satisfaction in their role's gone up, the quality of the work that they're producing has gone up, innovation levels have gone up. So early days, trialling it, but if that's an indication of what the benefits we can get, and I'm now responsible for people and culture, the business can expect to see that occur across the whole bank.
Okay, on a void question this side of the room. Your hand went up just ahead of the gentleman on your right, so you're the
Mark Taylor, I think I'm a member of probably the last count 5 co-ops of Queensland Teachers Mutual Bank. I mentioned that one. In Germany, about half the renewable energy sector is cooperatively owned or owned by municipalities. And there have been some efforts in Australia to establish renewable energy mutuals.
Yep, Hepburn.
Wind.
Yep.
And I'm a member of Earthworker Co-op, which is solar water in Victoria.
Yeah.
And
who was a customer of ours?
Yeah, and they try to release, they have created investment instruments for members, but unfortunately Queenslanders can't buy them because apparently our legislation hasn't been harmonised with New South Wales and Victoria. And it seems to me that the legislation for cooperatives isn't as supportive in Queensland as
it's moving to a national, standardised national legislation, but it's not yet all through, but they are. That's one of the reasons why we operate all the cooperative mutual principles under the Corporations Act. So you can apply, you can sit within the Corps Act and operate as a cooperative. Yeah, and that's built into your constitution. So that's the way you get around it. Yeah.
Lady at the back.
Thank you. My name is Hannah Crowell from the Tourism Sport Hotel Management Department of GBS. My question is about growth. You mentioned that one of the drivers of business is growth targets, and fundamental underlying economic principle is continuous growth. Obviously, your company is interested in growth because you've talked about the size, and you're obviously advertising, trying to get more customers. But how do you decide what is a good target, and when is enough enough?
Good question. It is a good question. So at the moment, our rate of growth is system plus. So at the moment, system growth within the banking sector is about 7.1%, and we're about 9.9 on lending and about 13 on investments. So a system plus. It's putting some pressure onto the business. The fundamentals around growth, building scale is critically important for two reasons. There's an economic benefit to building scale. In our business, though, we see scale is the larger the business, the greater the impact that we have, both on people's lives. Greater the profit that we can generate, the more we can invest back into the communities. So would I love to stand here one day and announce a major for bank size profit being a responsible bank? Absolutely I would. Why? Because those monies are owned by the customers who own the bank, and it gives me greater capacity to invest back into their communities and the bank. So growth is good. But we will never do that at the risk of the values that underpin the bank, and we will never do it at the risk of the credit quality of where we lend. Absolutely key. In fact, we have the lowest level of impaired loans of any financial institution in the country because we apply a responsible overlay to it. When the board came out of board planning last year, they said, in terms of the growth agenda, we want to grow this business. We brought on board some new directors with a growth ambition that will help us grow the business. There were two non-negotiables from the board: customer ownership, responsible banking, non-negotiable. So we will never put that at risk. But we will grow the bank, and we will continue to do that in a responsible way, and we will do that based on being a customer-owned bank. Our limitation in growth, our economic limitation in growth, is our capacity at the moment to generate sufficient profit to retain as capital. Because as the bank grows, you need to grow your capital base to support your investments that you make. So we could grow, we can't grow at a level beyond our capacity to generate profit to invest in capital, because we have no external sources of capital. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Andrew, your hand's go up like 15 times. You've got a 30-second question and a 30-second answer.
Very much related to the previous question. One of the outcomes of large companies is that area of rent seeking that does try to challenge the regulatory environment to your benefit. I love your commitment to stand firm on values. How are you going to?
Because the moment I don't, my customers will walk. So
are they self-interested?
the moment I move beyond, outside the sphere of providing a responsible approach to banking, my customers who own the bank, who bank with us because of a responsible approach to banking, will move. We'll just walk.
And I'll start following on Twitter.
That's right.
Game's up.
So the moment that we took a position on responsible banking, we were putting our head up. So customer ownership is a defensive strategy to an acquisition, and responsible banking puts a discipline into the business that the moment that we move outside that, we put the business at risk. And I know that some decisions that we will make, I might make an interest rate reduction. I'll give you an example. The RBA made an announcement on 25 basis points they cut out of the official cash rate. I know that if I put a piece of communication out like all the other banks immediately, which says we're cutting our home loan rate by 25 basis points, I'll make all the home loan borrowers very happy. And that's what the banks did. But they forgot something. 60% of the funds that finance those home loans come from depositors. So I stood back and I watched the market, see how it occurred, and then I put out a piece of communication about 10 days later that said, we've taken our time to be able to look at this official cash rate. We haven't chased the banks down because the borrower's benefit is at the expense of the depositor. And I got a whole lot of people who are relying on interest income. So I'm not going to ignore that group of people to benefit my borrowers. And we had 4,400 people read that article, and we've never had more engagement on that piece. Some came back and said, that's why I bank with the bank, because they take a responsible decision. I had some that came back and said, I never even thought about it. I thought it was a no-brainer. All the other banks dropped their interest rate by 25 basis points. I was wondering why you guys were so slow to come out of the box and then make your announcement. But now I kind of get it. The money that I borrowed to buy my house is that pensioner who also came in online. We have an online engagement forum where and I get it now. My benefit is that pensioner's loss. So thanks for being responsible. And the moment that I break that trust, and remember we talked all about trust, the moment I break that trust, I've broken the business model. So I can't.
Let's give Rowan a big hand. I'd like to present you with this gift, Rowan. Most speakers only agree to come if they get 2 copies of the Griffith Review. So,
cheers. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.